So I believe that we are living in the days of the judges, at least analogously. Obviously, I don't mean that in any weird, literal sort of sense where we are somehow going back in time to the days of the judges in the Bible. But I do believe that we live in a day that is analogous in many ways to the time of the judges. What do I mean by that? Well, for instance, one of the common phrases that's repeated throughout the book of Judges is that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It's this idea that society has broken down to the point that everybody just does what they think is right and what they think is good. And though we aren't necessarily to an extreme in that way, I do think that you see the massive cultural upheaval and cultural revolution that's going on around us. And even if you just look at the church, just look inside the church and how really we're in the place where American evangelicalism is just a bunch of people doing what is right in their own eyes. There's not really a care for what the Scripture really says. There is a care to find support in Scripture for what I want to do or for what I believe is right. But there's very little coming to the text in humility and seeing what God would have. There's very little understanding that my life is not my own, and I am going to join in the Lord's plan and His desires rather than bring Him in on my plans and my desires and have Him as a little add-on to my life, a little good luck charm for me. Another thing that you see throughout the book of Judges is that the vast majority of the leaders in the time of the judges, those who were judges, were extremely flawed or should not, in some sense, have been judges, should not have been leaders in Israel, and yet they were. And in that way, they were good representatives of the people. In fact, the book of Judges, though it starts off with some judges who are just shown to be faithful, the vast majority, as the text continues, and the vast majority of verbiage in the book of Judges is given to men like Jephthah and Gideon and Samson. And Samson is the last judge spoken of, and he is not good. Right? The whole point of Samson is that he is a really rough guy. He is a horrible man. And yet the Lord chooses to use him nonetheless to work for the good of His people. But things just keep getting worse. The time of the judges was not a time when things were getting better and better for God's people. Things were getting worse and worse and worse. I believe that that is similar to our own time. Not only do we do what is right in our own eyes, but also the leaders that God seems to raise up. If you just look over the last 50, 100 years of American Christianity, the Lord will raise up different men at different times, it seems, and there will be some form of revival or reformation or some kind of reawakening spiritually across our country, but it will be short-lived. It will usually only be for the lifetime or not even of this prominent figure. And when later we find out that, whether it be the teachings of these men who kind of come to popularity, or it is their own lifestyle, we find out that really they're not great men. Even the best of our leaders have serious, significant flaws. So if we're living in the time of the judges, and I think that it's a good analogy for the time that we're in. Biblically speaking, narratively speaking, what is the answer to the judges? What is the answer to such a disjointed, dysfunctional, sinful time? What do you do? I've asked several friends of mine that question, and invariably, almost every single one has answered by saying it's the monarchy, right? It's the monarchy. It's having a king, specifically once you have David as the king. That's not completely wrong. There is a sense in which that is true, but I actually think that there's an answer that kind of takes priority, at least in the overall narrative of the Old Testament. What do you have in between the monarchy and the book of Judges? Or I could ask it like this: what do you have between the book of Judges and the book of 1 Samuel? Ruth. You have the book of Ruth. What is Ruth all about? Well, for one, it takes place during the days of the Judges. If you start reading the book of Ruth, what it says is that this took place during the days of the Judges. This is when this is happening. That should kind of tip us off to say, okay, so this is the way that somebody was living during those times. Not one of the leaders, not one of these well-known prominent figures like a Samson or a Jephthah, but this is just a regular person living in this time. Okay? What exactly in the book of Ruth is an answer to the time of the Judges? Well, you have this woman, Ruth, this Moabitess, who is unknown, who is unimportant in the grand scheme of things, apparently, right? That's what it seems like. It begins with a tragedy. It begins with her husband dying. But what does she decide to do? Though she has zero power, she has zero influence in the world, what does she decide to do? She decides to be faithful with what she has. She decides to serve the true and living God, and she decides to help to serve and care for Naomi, her mother-in-law, and so she takes responsibility for that which is directly in front of her. She takes responsibility for the people that she's actually accountable to in the eyes of God. And what does this lead to? Well, as she continues to do that, she meets Boaz, and there's that whole love story. But basically, how it ends is we find out that Ruth, though she is added into a powerful family at that point, by the way, Boaz is very much a leader in Israel, a prince, or, I don't know the word that you want to use, but he's important. But you have this situation where Ruth decides to be faithful in what she has directly in front of her. And then the Lord gives her more. She's faithful to her mother-in-law, and the Lord gives her more to be faithful to, which is a husband. And then we're told at the end that she has children. And so Ruth is a faithful woman, faithful to God, first and foremost. Then she's faithful to those who she is in relationship with, her family, so her mother-in-law, who she could have left, but she chose not to. And then she's faithful to find a husband, get married, have children, and be a faithful wife and mother. And that's it. There's nothing spectacular, or at least particularly spectacular about it. She's not Deborah riding into battle, right? She's not in these positions where you would think, wow, what an unbelievably amazing person. She did all these miraculous things, right? She's not in that position. She's not doing those things. She's just faithful in what little God has given her, which is to be a wife and a mother. And what does that lead to? It leads to David. Ruth is in the line of David. And because she's in the line of David, she's also in the line of Christ. Right? She is mentioned in the genealogies of Christ. Okay? What I think that we can learn from that is basically in the time of the Judges, what you need is a bunch of Ruths. You need a bunch of people who are willing to say, you know what? Yeah, everything is a mess, right? Things are not looking good, but I'm going to be faithful to what God has given me. I am going to be a faithful son or daughter and honor my parents. I am going to be a faithful spouse and honor my husband or my wife. I'm going to live in a way that honors God in that relationship. And I'm going to raise children to love and honor God. And that's it. I'm not going to try to do some kind of giant, spectacular thing that the whole world needs to see because look at me, look what I've done. Right? That is kind of the pop evangelical desire. That's the desire to see massive outbreaks of revival and God's fire falling on people so that they come alive, and it's this huge event. It's this spectacular event and production. And that's just not the primary way that God works in the world. And if we're in the time of the judges, what we really want, what we really need to see is more Ruths. So let that be an encouragement to you. Be faithful. Be faithful in what God has given you. Be a faithful spouse. Be a faithful parent. Be a faithful son or daughter. Act in a way that is honorable with the responsibilities that God has given you, those things that you're actually accountable for. Seek to honor God in those ways, and He will bless it. Now, how He will bless it, how He will use it, that's yet to be seen. But He will bless that. He will bless that kind of faithfulness. Hey everyone, thanks for listening today. If you have any questions, concerns, ideas, problems, anything with what I just said, feel free to reach out to me. My email is pastormichaeljbowman@gmail.com. You can find more information about Christ Covenant Church, where I pastor, at ccc-pca.org. And if you're in the La Crosse area, I would love to get together and talk more in person. All right, bye.